our talk for this morning. And without further ado, let's get started. I will pick up my laser pointer. Lovely. I will shut off my video and we will begin with the British Museum. Now, the museums, galleries and archives of London gather together objects, historical information and memories. Through these collections, they seek to connect the past to people in the present day and promote thought about the future. Cultural organisations may have a very specific focus to their collection, such as the portraits at the National Portrait Gallery. They may have a subject theme, such as the Science Museum, or they may have a wide remit, such as the British Museum, which holds objects from across the globe and across time. And the organisations we're going to look at today are all in London. They all have free entry, though most of them charge for big loan exhibitions. They will have comfort break facilities and cafes, and each organisation has a web presence and further information about opening times, how to get there, and their collections, which can be found on their individual websites. And what we're going to do today with each of the organisations we're going to meet is we're going to give ourselves a little visual introduction to the organisation. We're going to hear a little bit about its history, how it came to be, and then we're going to look at a couple of choice objects from its collection, just to give us a little flavour of what you might see if you visit that organisation, or if you go onto their website and follow some of the stories and collections that they're hosting online. So we're beginning with the British Museum, which we see here in an aerial shot to the left. And the British Museum has a collection of 8 million objects charting human history, art and culture. The museum was established in 1753 in Montague House, picture of which we can see to the right, on the site of the current building. And Montague House was the initial home of the British Museum, where the first collections were set up for public view. And just below we can see a scene from early Victorian times, which shows the frontage of Montague House, which would have been the entrance into the museum from Great Russell Street. Now, the foundation of the British Museum collection centred on that of physicist Dr. Hans Sloane. And during his lifetime, and particularly after he married Elizabeth Langley Rose, the widow of a wealthy Jamaican planter and heir to her own father's planter fortune, Sloane had the money to collect 71,000 items, including books, manuscripts, drawings, natural history specimens and ancient objects. He left the collection to George II for the nation in exchange for a payment of £20,000 to his heirs. Then in 1823, George IV gave the King's Library, assembled by George III, to the British Museum, and Parliament gave the right to a copy of every book published in the country, meaning that the British Museum's library would expand indefinitely. Alongside this library, the museum continued to collect ancient, medieval and modern objects through donation, excavation and purchase. Departure of the library to a new site at St Pancras in 1998 enabled the redevelopment of the central area of the Victorian Museum building, which had replaced Montague House throughout the 1830s through to the 1850s, and enabled the museum to create the Queen Elizabeth Great Court, which opened in the year 2000. And you can see here in this aerial shot the original roof of the round reading room, which stood in the centre of the British Museum buildings, covered with the Norman Foster glass roof. And then here, right at the very back, the latest building development on the site, which is the 2014 World Conservation and Exhibitions Centre, which is where the new exhibition galleries and also the scientific research and conservation laboratories are now housed. And here at the front, we can compare the frontage on Great Russell Street, still have trees outside, but now the gateway for Montague House has been knocked down and the entrance to the museum set further back across the forecourt. Now, when it comes to looking at some of the objects from the British Museum, we've had a look at a goodly number over this year, so I thought today I would make my own personal selection. Now, they say that everyone is either a cat or a dog person, and I will quite openly declare myself as a dog person. And here are 3 of my favourite dogs to be found in the over 50 permanent collection galleries at the British Museum. So here at the bottom left, we have a small pottery dog vessel with a spout. It dates between 300 BC and AD 300 and comes from the west coast region of modern Mexico. And he's a lovely little piece. And whenever I see him sitting in the Mexican galleries, he's got this lovely round body. The pottery shape of the vessel really makes him look like a little dog you just want to pick up and cuddle. And then above, we have a Roman brooch, also on display, this time in Gallery 70. And this is a Roman bronze brooch decorated with enamel in the shape of a running dog. And it dates to about AD 50 to 150. And the thing I like about this dog is this little brooch looks very like some of the brooches you see being sold nowadays. And these little dotty enamel spots of yellow and blue really have a very modern look to them and really speak to the fact that there's very often very little new under the sun, and human beings have been involved in not only sustaining life but also creating a rich cultural world around them ever since the first human diaspora out of Africa. And then finally, to the right, we have the Townley greyhounds. This is a Roman marble statue dating to the 1st or 2nd century AD. It was excavated from the site of an imperial villa on mainland Italy. And what I particularly like about the Townley greyhounds is not only do they have the most beautiful anatomical detail all the way down to the 5th claw. Dogs have 4 paws on the front bit of their feet, and then the 5th paw is what is sometimes known as the dew claw, which is on the back of the leg, a bit behind what we might call their elbow. But also the fact that one of them is gently pulling on the ear of the other one, who looks very resigned and very patient with the playful nature of their probably younger companion. So the British Museum, over 50 permanent galleries. And the lovely thing about being in Camden is that you can pop in just for an hour or two and then come back, and there's always something new to see. Our next museum is the Museum of London over in East London in the city. And it documents the history of London from prehistoric to modern times. And the museum is the largest urban history collection in the world, with more than 6 million objects. The Foundation collection was established in 1964 from the amalgamation of objects held by the City Corporation and the London Museum, which at that time was in Kensington Palace. The museum buildings opened in December 1976 as part of the Barbican Estate, which was a construction project redeveloped a badly bomb-damaged area of the city. The galleries contain objects, models and pictures, with a strong emphasis on archaeological discoveries, urban development and London's cultural life. And the museum overlooks part of the original Roman city wall, which can be seen just outside the entrance. This is the entrance to the museum. It actually sits in the centre of what is, to all intents and purposes, a traffic roundabout, and entry is via upper level walkways, which you access through doorways on the pavement. And the museum in March 2015 announced plans to move from this Barbican site to nearby Smithfield Market. But at the moment, you can still find it down there in its 1970s home as part of the Barbican estate, and well worth a visit, particularly if you're interested in the details of the history of the City of London and the greater 33 boroughs, wider London, which have popped up quite a lot during our talks over the year, moments where London has intersected not only with local but with national historical events. And one of the key items at the Museum of London is the Lord Mayor's State Coach. And the Lord Mayor's State Coach, along with the Queen's Gold Coach and the Speaker's Coach, is one of the three great state coaches. And unlike the other two, which are rarely used, the Lord Mayor's Coach is used annually at the Lord Mayor's Show, where it is pulled by 6 Shire horses and is therefore deemed to be the oldest ceremonial vehicle in regular use in the world. The coach was commissioned in 1757 when it was used in the procession of that year, which conveyed the new Lord Mayor from Mansion House to the Royal Courts of Justice. When it's not in use, it's on display in the Museum of London, and in advance of the show each year, it's moved to a temporary glass carriage house outside the Guildhall, where you can pop down and have a little look at it being prepared for the procession later in the month. Staying over towards East London and also linking in with the Museum of London itself, we have Museum of London Docklands. You might know it as the Museum in Docklands, its former name, and it is on the West India Quay. It explores the history of the River Thames, the growth of the Port of London, and the dock's historical links to the Atlantic slave trade. The museum itself opened in 2003 in sugar warehouses, and here you can see the outside of those buildings, still with some of the pulley devices used for moving the goods in and out of the warehouse. It was originally known as Number 1 Warehouse and was built in 1802, and much of the collection inside it comes from the Museum and Archive of the Port of London Authority. And this was transferred to the Museum of London in the 1970s, but remained in storage for the next 30 years or so until it was transferred to Docklands Museum, where it is now on display. Over time, the museum has also acquired several historic vessels, which have recently been rationalised. So if you pop down there, you won't see those historical vessels. One of them has been transferred to a local group. The Way barge has been transferred to the National Trust, and 2 old tugboats have been transferred to Trinity Buoy Wharf. And then in 2017, the museum opened a display of archaeological findings discovered during the Crossrail work. And I think this is a lovely demonstration of how museum collections are continually evolving. Objects go into a collection through different avenues. We had a little look earlier in the year about different ways that 10 key objects at the British Museum had come into the collection, the different journeys they took. That's something we're going to return to next year. And here we have an illustration of how ongoing developments in London, such as the building of Crossrail, then provide another opportunity for archaeological material to be surfaced and go into museum collections. In terms of the museum's objects, we are going to look at a print. It is an anti-slave trade broadside with plans of a slave ship based on the Brooks of Liverpool. And it shows how enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic, the ship being able to carry 609 people during a 6 to 8 week voyage from the coast of West Africa to the West Indies. And this is a history covered by the Sugar and Slavery Gallery at the Docklands Museum, a picture of which we see here to the right. And the reason I chose this object is because museums, particularly when it comes to objects which exist in multiple copies, such as a print or perhaps a mass manufactured ceramic statue, can exist in several different museums at the same time. So this print of the Brookes is also held in the prints and drawings department of the British Museum. We have another copy of it. And indeed, sometimes the British Museum will have several copies of the same print. And for the British Museum, this print acted as inspiration for it to acquire, after display, an artwork known as La Bouche d'Oie, which was itself inspired by the Brookes print and which used petrol cans to represent the slaves held on the ship. And this artwork was acquired by the British Museum to mark the 200th anniversary of the abolition of slavery. And this is one of the things that the British Museum is looking at the moment, and that is how we continue to collect the modern world. At what point should a museum ever say we have enough objects? At what point should it ever say we have stopped collecting? And what do those two statements mean? What is enough objects? When does history end? So the idea of continuing to grow the collections, looking in particular at key events, key cultural moments in the world around us, is something that all museums, art galleries and archives are thinking about on a daily basis. Now, continuing with our maritime theme, we are now going to hop across to Greenwich, where we're going to meet the National Maritime Museum, which is part of a network of museums in the Maritime Greenwich World Heritage Site. The other three are the Queen's House, which we can see here in the centre of this lower picture, which was completed in 1636, the first fully classical building in England, making a break with the traditional red brick Tudor style of building. And the first queen to live in it was a lady we met when we were looking at the Stuart dynasty, Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of Charles I. The heritage site also includes the Royal Observatory and the Cutty Sark, the last two of these having an entry charge, the National Maritime Museum and the Queen's House both being free. The National Maritime Museum itself arose from an interest in preserving British naval and ship memorabilia taken by the wealthy ship owner James Cade. In the 1920s, as a member of the Society for Nautical Research, he provided money to repair and restore HMS Victory, giving an initial £50,000, followed by an additional sum of £15,000 to restore the ship, which is now part of the collections down at historic dockyards in Portsmouth. And in 1927, Cade joined the board established to set up a national museum for displaying Britain's maritime history. And an opportunity to do this arose when the Royal Hospital School, founded in 1712 as part of Greenwich Hospital, moved to Suffolk, the larger premises, in 1933. With the school's buildings empty, Cade funded the cost of renovating them to serve as the National Maritime Museum, which we see the front and the entrance of here in the upper picture. And this cost eventually reached, in the 1930s, £80,000. At the same time, he began purchasing historical objects, rare books, globes, nautical instruments, artwork, and ship's models, which were the basis for the current collection. And it was reported in 1934 that this startup collection was worth over £300,000. The museum itself was formally opened in March 1937 by George VI, who was accompanied by his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and it now holds over 2.5 million items. And a full redevelopment of the main galleries was completed in 1999. And if you look very carefully at this top picture, you can just see above either side of the central entrance block that the National Maritime Museum now has a glassed over central atrium, very similar to the glassed over central atrium in the Great Court at the British Museum, where they can have large scale displays and also an open area with a huge map across the floor. So you can literally walk across the world at the National Maritime Museum. And in terms of the object from the National Maritime Museum, I have picked an object which is from HMS Victory. It's a rectangular piece of canvas, and it was cut from the main topsail of HMS Victory immediately after the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805. And it was taken into store at Chatham Docks immediately after the battle, and is now part of the Natural Maritime Museum collection. And we've spoken quite often in the past about how an object can be historic in its own right, but then the story of that object then becomes part of its history once it arrives in the museum collection. So here we can see that someone has inscribed, probably at Chatham, or when it first arrived at the National Maritime Museum, information about what this object represents, including the shot hole, presumably from a French cannon, fired straight through the Victory mainsail, and also underneath its object registration number. So its new name stroke number, now that it is part of the collection of a National Museum. We now go from East London across to South Kensington, and we're going to start in the South Kensington area with the Victoria and Albert Museum. And here we see the entrance to the museum, which is a museum of applied and decorative art and design, housing over 2.2 million objects. It was founded in 1852 and named after Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And the V&A is located in Kensington, in an area commonly known as Albertopolis, because of all its associations with Prince Albert. The collection itself spans 5,000 years of art, drawn from Europe, North America, Asia, North Africa, including ceramics, glass and textile, metalwork, furniture, prints and drawings, and photographs. Now the focus is on medieval art onwards, and many of the ancient world objects held by the V&A were transferred to the British Museum to become part of their collections from the 1950s through to the 1970s. So again, a rationalisation of the V&A collection, which then resulted in the growth of the British Museum collection. Now the V&A itself has its origins in the Great Exhibition of 1851, which was held in Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, Crystal Palace later being moved to Sydenham. And the museum's first director, Henry Cole, was involved in planning the Great Exhibition, and several exhibits from the Great Exhibition were purchased to form the core of the museum's collection. It initially opened as the Museum of Manufactures in May 1852, where it was sited at Marlborough House in Westminster before moving to Somerset House. By February 1854, discussions were underway to transfer this nascent collection to its current site, where it was renamed the South Kensington Museum. So only a few years after its initial foundation, it had already been through 3 name changes. In South Kensington, it was officially opened by Queen Victoria in 1857. And late night openings were introduced the next year, made possible by gaslighting inside the galleries. Within 10 years, the scientific collection at the museum started to move off-site to nearby smaller galleries. And they became known as the Science Museum, getting their own separate director in 1893. In 1899, back at the main site, the South Kensington Museum officially became the Victoria and Albert Museum, so received its 4th name. And the objects, the scientific objects which had moved off site, then gained their own permanent home, which we'll hear about later, and became the Science Museum. In 1939, at the outbreak of World War II, most of the collection was sent to a quarry in Wiltshire, Montague House in Somerset, and a tunnel underneath Aldwych Tube Station. Larger items remained in situ, where they were either protected by sandbags or bricked in. And indeed, during the war, some of the galleries at the museum became a school for children evacuated from Gibraltar. And the South Court became a canteen for the Royal Air Force and bomb damage repair squads. After the war, before the objects had returned, the museum held a Britain Can Make It exhibition in 1946, which itself led to the Festival of Britain in 1951. Now, if we look across to the picture on the right, this is a tiny reminder that in the early days, a wide expanse of garden surrounded the V&A. The lawn and trees belonged to the original house on the site, Brompton Park House. These grounds were gradually built over until today. The enclosed garden courtyard is all that remains of the gardens which once filled most of South Kensington. And indeed, this courtyard was originally intended to be an open space. Over time, the initial block of the Victoria and Albert was joined by the 2 side wings and the front wing to make an enclosed courtyard in the middle, which was completely redesigned and reopened to the public in July 2005. So a rather nice connection there with the history of the British Museum, the idea of areas in London often having a former use before they became part of the heritage landscape. As with the British Museum, there was an existing elite house on this site in South Kensington, and remains of that house, a little clue as to the former landscape of the area, now captured in the central courtyard at the V&A. Now, if you were to go inside the V&A and through the front entrance, you would see this piece. This chandelier, known as the ice blue and spring green chandelier, is made of blue green and yellow blown glass. It was installed in 1999, and the addition of further pieces over time by the artist means that it now fills the central roundel at the main entrance and hangs above the reception and information desk for visitors. Although it's known as a chandelier, technically it's a hanging sculpture because it does not light up by itself. It is lit by spotlights, which you can see here, added onto the gallery floor, which are directed towards the piece to illuminate it. And before it was installed, the ceiling above it had to be reinforced due to the weight of the glass pieces. Across to the right, we have a small oil sketch, which is part of the V&A collection. And it is a view of Hampstead Heath by John Constable, painted in 1821. And it's a proprietary sketch for a work, a full-scale larger work, which is now held in Tate Britain. So again, this nice idea that different objects can be held by different museums, but those objects together tell the story of a single final piece. So proprietary sketch in South Kensington, final work up on Millbank in central London in Tate Britain. And this particular oil sketch is inscribed on the back in pencil by John Constable himself. And it tells us that he completed this sketch on the 13th of October. It even tells us that he sketched it between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. And he notes that the weather on that day was very fine with a gentle wind. And we know that the wider context for this piece is that between 1819 and 1826, Constable rented a house at Hampstead nearly every summer to draw the surrounding landscape and skies. And in 1827, he and his family moved to Hampstead permanently. So although he is very well known for his Suffolk landscapes, he actually was at one point in his life a London lad. We're now going to move on to a museum we mentioned briefly when we were talking about the V&A, and that is the Science Museum. The Science Museum today is part of the Science Museum Group after merging with the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester in 2012. We've heard already that it started as part of the collections of the South Kensington Museum until items moved off-site, and eventually in 1909 a fully independent science museum came into existence, and there was a permanent split between the art and science collections of the former museum. Construction of the museum building began with the East Block, which we can see here, and it was intended to be the first building of a much larger project which was never realised. The Science Museum's present quarters were open to the public after World War I from 1919 through to 1928. And over the years since then, the building has expanded, with other blocks being added during the 30s, 60s. It then amalgamated with the adjacent Geology Museum in 1988, and its most recent wing, completed in 2000, is the Welcome Wing, which focuses on digital technology. And inside the museum itself, there are a number of open central atriums around which you have open mezzanine galleries showing the museum's collections, which include 2 objects which I've chosen because they both have a rather nice space link. The Science Museum itself holds over 350,000 items, and some of those items are very large indeed. They include Stephenson's rocket, the first jet engine, and the Apollo, the Apollo 10 command module. And the two objects we have here date from about 300 years apart, but both speak to human interest in the skies above us. The object to the left is a reflecting telescope built by the astronomer Sir William Herschel for his sister Caroline in around 1795 when they lived in Slough. And Caroline worked alongside her brother and was an astronomer in her own right, discovering 8 comets between 1786 and 1797. And she was the first woman to be paid for her scientific work. Next to it, we see a Sovcol KV-2 spacesuit worn by Helen Sharman, the first British woman in space, during the Juno mission to the Russian Mir station in 1991. And each of these suits is bespoke made. It is tailored to the exact dimensions of the person traveling into space. It has an inner pressurized rubber, what is referred to as bladder or wetsuit, and an outer layer made from nylon canvas. There are connection points, which you can see here in blue, which allow it to be joined up with an oxygen supply, has a pressure control gauge, and the helmet and the boots are completely integral to the suit. So it's a onesie, a space onesie. We're staying in South Kensington now, where we're going to look at the Natural History Museum. This museum is home to life and earth sciences with over 80 million items. And many of these items have historic as well as scientific value, such as the specimens collected by Charles Darwin. And the foundation of the collection for the Natural History Museum was the dried plants, animal and human skeletons collected by Hans Sloane, and they were initially housed in Montague House as part of the British Museum collection. Fortunately, by the early 1800s, most of the Sloane collection had disappeared. Still housed in Montague House, but most of it no longer existed. One of the keepers of natural history at the British Museum, George Shaw, sold many of Hans Sloane's specimens to the Royal College of Surgeons and had periodic bonfires of material in the British Museum grounds, while his successors applied to the trustees for permission to destroy decayed specimens. The 1833 annual report for the British Museum said that of the 5,500 insects listed in the Sloane collection, none remained. And the inability of the Natural History Department at the British Museum to conserve objects became notorious. And the Treasury refused to entrust it with specimens collected at government expense. Staff appointments were plagued by favouritism, and in 1862, the nephew of a mistress of a trustee was appointed as an assistant, despite not knowing the difference between a butterfly and a moth. One curator removed all the labels and registration numbers from cases arranged by a rival curator. And when the shell collection of Hugh Cumming was acquired, the open specimen trays were carried across the Central British Museum courtyard in a gale, and all the labels blew away. Despite this, the natural history collection at the museum continued to grow and needed more space. And so land in South Kensington was purchased. And this is now the Natural History Museum, work on which started in 1873 and was completed by 1880. Items were transferred from Bloomsbury to the new site in South Kensington, although the institution remained a department of the British Museum and was known initially as British Museum, open brackets, Natural History, closed brackets. It wasn't until 1963 that it became an independent museum, although the British Museum name was retained. In 1989, the museum publicly rebranded itself as the Natural History Museum and stopped using the British Museum name on its advertising, although its name was not formally changed to the Natural History Museum until 1992. And the Natural History Museum is probably as well known for its interiors as it is for the objects inside it. And I've chosen, oh, beg your pardon, and I've chosen two objects on display in the magnificent central hall of the Natural History Museum, which is probably most famous for the 32-metre long replica Diplodocus skeleton named Dippy, that formerly dominated the vaulted central hall. Now, the exhibit was gifted by the industrialist Andrew Carnegie after a discussion with King Edward VII, who at that time was a trustee of the British Museum. Carnegie paid for the copying of an original skeleton, which at that point was held in an American museum, and the pieces were sent to London in 36 crates. The skeleton has been on display in the galleries for over 100 years, but it wasn't until 1979 that it was moved to the central hall, where it probably was at its most famous and most viewed. It was removed in early 2017 to be replaced by the real skeleton, which we see below it, hanging from the ceiling, of a young blue whale. It's a skeleton which itself is 128 years old, part of the Natural History Museum collection, and she has been nicknamed Hope. So if you go down to the Natural History Museum now, Dippy has gone off on tour around various British museums, and the central hall is now dominated by the blue whale, Hope. We're now going to take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our review of museums, art galleries and archives, and we're going to leave South Kensington and head up into central London, and get your coffee and your tea ready, because we have a few more rounds of British Museum bingo to go. See you in 10 minutes. And welcome back, everyone. And we are now going to move into central London, and we are going to begin with the National Gallery. The National Gallery, an art gallery in Trafalgar Square. It was founded in 1824 and houses over 2,300 paintings in its galleries, dating from the mid-1200s to 1900. An early opportunity to establish a national art collection had occurred previously in 1777, when the descendants of Sir Robert Walpole put his collection up for sale, and MPs urged the government to buy it, suggesting that it could be housed in a noble gallery to be built in the spacious gardens of the British Museum. Nothing came of the suggestion, and 20 years later, the collection was bought by Catherine the Great and is now in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. In 1823, another smaller collection came on the market, and was purchased to found a national art collection. This collection was open to the public as the National Gallery in Pall Mall and was soon augmented by collections gifted by British art collectors. The Pall Mall Gallery was frequently overcrowded, and there was also subsidence in the area which caused the gallery to briefly move out. So the government decided in 1832 that a new gallery was to be built on the site of the King's Mews in Charing Cross, an area which had been transformed during the 1820s into the Trafalgar Square that we see today. Today, the facade onto Trafalgar Square remains essentially unchanged from that 1830 build, although the building itself has gradually expanded, and over to the far left of our picture, the 1991 Salisbury Wing extension is today considered a significant example of postmodern architecture. So a nice example of how the buildings associated with the museum itself then become part of the history of the collection and the institution. And also with the fact that Robert Walpole's collection was then sold to Russia, an interesting and ongoing discussion around where objects should be housed, the balance between private collections and national collections, and also the balance between the geographical location of objects near where they were produced, near where they were used, nearby where they were acquired, near to the people who acquired or purchased them. And we're now going to have a look at two works from the National Gallery. And on the left, we have one of the oldest works in the National Gallery and a personal favourite of mine, the Wilton Diptych, painted at the end of the 1300s for Richard II of England, who is seen kneeling in front of the Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. The painter's unknown, but it's a rare example of medieval art to have survived the Puritan purges of the 1600s, and in particular, the time immediately after the Civil War, when Oliver Cromwell reigned as the protector of England. To the right, we have a piece by Vincent van Gogh, a wheat field with cypress trees, which we know was painted in September 1889, when he was a patient at a psychiatric hospital in southern France. And it's one of a series of works inspired by the view from his window. And another question we often get asked about our objects is, how much is it worth? Well, in effect, once it goes into a national collection, it becomes priceless. But we do know that a similar picture, another picture painted as part of this series, was sold in America in 1993 for $57 million. So whilst museum collections ultimately cannot be valued, they are also ultimately priceless in both senses of the word, because that the value of them runs beyond human comprehension. Just behind the National Gallery, we have the National Portrait Gallery, which houses portraits of historically important and famous British people. And it was the first such portrait gallery in the world when it opened in 1856. The National Gallery has regional outposts. So some of its collection is on display at Benningborough Hall in Yorkshire and Montague House in Somerset. The gallery was founded with an offer of funds from the philanthropist William Henry Alexander, who donated £80,000 to establish it, with the government providing the site in St Martin's Place and an additional £16,000, and the gallery opened on the 4th of April 1896. Although a current programme of refurbishment means that the gallery is closed to the public until at least 2023. So before then, let's have a little peek inside at some pieces from its collection. And the National Portrait Collection has portraits not only in drawn and painted form, and also has photographic portraits. So we see here to the left the portrait of Mary Seacole, who worked out in the Crimea, nursing British troops during the Crimean War of the 1850s. And then over to the left, Sir Tom Jones. And I rather like these two contrasting portraits because modern photography allows the capture of portraits across time. So at the top, we have Tom Jones with his wife Melinda, photographed in 1963. And then below, we have him photographed more recently in 2001. And another nice point about both these pieces is that both of the pieces were donated to the National Portrait Gallery by the photographers themselves. So one good way to make sure that you get objects into a museum collection is to donate your own work. We now move a little bit further down the Thames to Tate Britain, which is part of the Tate network of galleries, with Tate Modern, which we'll see in a moment, and then Tate Liverpool and Tate St Ives. And it houses a collection of British art from the 1540s through to the 1930s, including a large number of works by Turner, who bequested all of his own personal collection of his own paintings to the nation. The gallery is on Millbank, on the site of the former Millbank prison, and it opened to the public in 1897 as the National Gallery of British Art, although it was informally known as the Tate Gallery from the start, from the name of Sir Henry Tate, one of its founders, and this was the name it officially adopted in 1932. And the inside of the building has undergone recent renovation, including the central roundel with its spiral staircase taking you down to the basement areas and the comfort facilities and the cafe. Now, originally the gallery housed British and modern artworks, but the launch of Tate Britain saw the modern collections move out, and the Millbank Gallery was renamed Tate Britain. Here we have Tate Modern on the south bank of the River Thames, directly opposite St Paul's Cathedral, and it is housed in the former Bankside Power Station, which was built in the 40s, 50s and 60s. The building itself is a 200-metre long building with a 99-metre central chimney, both of which are retained in the modern gallery building. The station itself was divided into 3 areas, and as a visitor, you enter through the huge turbine hall at the centre, and then there is a boiler house and a switch house, which are also gallery spaces on either end of the building. The power station itself closed in 1981, and Tate Modern was opened by Queen Elizabeth II in the year 2000. And the collections from Tate Britain and Tate Modern are here represented by a small selection of pictures, the first of which I've chosen, a self-portrait by Hogarth, because it enables me to show you a picture of Hogarth's pug, Trump. And Hogarth and his pug are also immortalised in a statue unveiled on Chiswick High Street, close to the house where Hogarth lived from 1749 to 1764. We also have a painting of Camden. This is a picture of Swiss Cottage by an artist who lived in the area. It was exhibited in 1914 and presented to the Tate by the artist's family in 1953. And it shows the intersection of Finchley Road, Fitzjohn's Avenue, and Adelaide Road. So an artwork and also a social document recording the landscape of central Camden just before World War I. Our final piece is Henry Matisse's The Snail, created in 1953. Now, in 1948, ill health had prevented Matisse from painting. So he started to produce works made by cutting or tearing shapes of painted paper, which were then positioned by an assistant working under his instruction. And this picture, The Snail, was inspired by drawings of snails that Matisse had been making, and the finished composition reflects the spiral shape found on a snail's shell. For our next museum, we are going to head even further south to the Imperial War Museum, a national museum which has 5 locations, 3 in London, where admission is free to Imperial War Museum London, but there is a charge for the site at HMS Belfast and also the Cabinet War Rooms. And then it has National War Museums North, which is free entry, and then a charging site at the Duxford Airfield in Cambridgeshire. And the Imperial War Museum started as a museum to record World War I and the civil and military war efforts of Britain and the Empire during this war. It's since expanded to include all conflicts in which British or Commonwealth forces have been involved since 1914, and includes a wide array of objects, including personal and official documents, photograph and film, artwork, military vehicles and aircraft, a ship, and also smaller artifacts. And if we look at a couple of items from its collection, we see here that it holds paintings recording the war effort, and this is a painting of a munitions factory in Glasgow showing the machining of 15-inch shells in the Singer Manufacturing Company workshop at Clydebank in Glasgow, painted in 1918 by the artist Anna Airy. And it shows women factory workers producing the shells with winches from the ceiling to lift the shells onto the wooden trolleys, taking them out of the factory to be transported to the front. And next to it, we have a small pamphlet. So museums objects are not always large and colourful. This is a small A5 pamphlet produced by the Ministry of Home Security during World War II, showing people how to set up their Morrison shelter underneath a table in their house to protect them from the expected air raids on the main cities of the UK during World War II. Now, it's not only independent museums that have collections. Historical collections are sometimes held by other public institutions, in this case, UCL Museums. So just up Gower Street, we have the Centre of University College London, a research university, and a member of the Federation of the University of London. UCL was founded in 1826, and it has several museums and collections, including archaeology, zoology, and geology. And we're going to have a quick little look at just one of these, one of my favourites, I have to say, the Victory Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, which today is housed in a former stable building, part of the wider campus of UCL, with public access off the bottom of Gower Street, and it is open to the public every afternoon and accessible via an entrance hall and a stairway, which takes you to the upper floor, where the museum has 3 galleries containing small artifacts, such as the collection of Shabdi's tomb objects from ancient Egypt, we see here to the right, writing tablets, mummy portraits, and mummy cases. And some parts of the collection are not lit to protect light-sensitive items, and torches are supplied to visitors so that they can see inside the cases. The collection has been digitised and its catalogue can be browsed online. And the museum also houses the world's oldest surviving woven garment, which was radiocarbon tested in 2015 and showed that the linen fabric it is made from dates to around 3400 BC. It was excavated in 1913 from a cemetery site where it was being used as a shroud, and it's displayed today stitched onto a modern silk shirt to show its intended form. It was identified in the museum collections in 1977 when it was taken with other textiles to the V&A for conservation, and its original form and its current value as an historical item were discovered. And we are going to move from the Victory Museum just up the road to our final institution today, the British Library. Now, the British Library came into existence in 1973 as the result of the British Library Act, a vision for a single institution at the heart of the UK's information network. It was purpose-built on the site of an old railway goods yard in St Pancras and opened in November 1997. And it drew together several library collections, including items previously held by the British Museum. And part of the core collection at the British Library is housed in the glass tower you see at the centre of the building when you go into the public spaces, which is the King's Library, the Library of George III, which we heard about previously, which was gifted to the British Museum, which we see here to the left. The King's Library, built originally in the early 1820s to house the library. Books have now been replaced with books from the House of Parliament Library, and the King's Library has moved up the road to the British Library. Now, working at the British Museum, there are 3 questions I am often asked when I'm walking around with my staff parcel. First of all is, where are the mummies? And I can always make visitors very happy by saying they're just upstairs. Second, I often get asked, where are the dinosaurs? We used to have them. They're now down in South Kensington, but we've got one dinosaur skull still in room 1. And then the other question I get asked very frequently is, where is the Magna Carta? The Magna Carta was part of our collection when we had the British Museum libraries, but now lives up at the British Library, which holds 2 of the 4 surviving copies of the Magna Carta, signed by King John at Runnymede in Surrey. And this gives me a lovely opportunity to introduce you to Katie Jackson, who is going to tell you more about the public programming at the British Library, the wonderful objects they hold, and the opportunities to learn about their collections. Thank you, Katie.
Hello. Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I won't keep you too long as I expect your tummies are rumbling as we head towards lunch. So I promise this will be a quick one, a quick overview of the British Library. And of course, I'm not there right now. I'm at home, as you can see. So my name is Katie. I work in the learning team at the British Library, and today I'm going to tell you a bit more about the library and build on what Catherine's already just told you, and explain some of the different ways in which you can use the library, because after all, without people coming into the library and using it, we would just be a big empty building, like all of the museums in London. And Catherine, thank you for this absolutely fantastic overview of the cultural offer in London. I think being at home for however many months we've been at home, we kind of forget how amazing the cultural offer is in London, and I've definitely refilled my list of places to go once we start going out and about a bit more in the coming weeks and months. So I'm going to share my screen now, and whilst I'm doing that, I just want to ask if anybody who is attending this talk today has actually been to the British Library, and if you have, put a little comment in the chat if you have. And let me just view the show. There we go. Okay, well, if you haven't been to the library, I mean, I wouldn't blame you, because it is a huge, enormous, intimidating building in St Pancras, which you can see in this picture here. And even if you do make it through the front door, it's almost like sensory overload once you've crossed the threshold, because you're faced with this huge open space. You can see all 5 floors of the library, and it's very busy. There's lots of people, pre-COVID, of course, and lots of choices of things to do. There's exhibitions to your left, there's a bookshop and a cafe to your right. And so my recommendation for you, if it's your first time going in the library, is just to walk straight in a straight line in front of you and find the information desk and speak to one of my lovely colleagues at the information desk who can help you with whatever it is that you're looking to find that day. So the picture that I'm showing is our main site of the British Library in central London at St Pancras. The spiky looking building you can see at the back is this Renaissance Hotel in St Pancras. It's a beautiful location and a lovely area. There's lots going on in King's Cross if you want to make a day of it by coming to the library and seeing what else is around nearby. But my colleagues in Leeds would be very upset if I didn't explain that there is also a site in Boston Spa in Wetherby in Yorkshire, and a huge portion of the collection is also held there, as well as having reading rooms at that site in Boston Spa in Yorkshire. And there are plans in the years to come to open a library site actually in Leeds, in the city centre. So fingers crossed for that, the development of that. But this building was opened in 1997, as Catherine said, purpose-built for the collections and designed by architect Sir Colin St John Wilson. And from certain angles, they say it's designed to look a bit like a ship. If you're stood in the piazza at the bottom of this picture, looking up at the library, they say it looks like a ship. The idea that it's a building on a sea of knowledge, because underneath that piazza is deep down into the basement are shelves and shelves and shelves of all the collections. Now, I'll leave you to judge whether that's a bit too cheesy or not, but I quite like that. I quite like the idea of building on a sea of knowledge. Now, it's serendipitous that you're here at this British Museum workshop, because as Catherine already alluded to, the collection held at the British Library began its life at the British Museum as its library. The 1972 British Library Act brought together multiple collections and organisations which make up the library as we know it today, and of course that included the British Museum Library. Now, our collection holds over 170 million items. It includes artefacts from every age of written civilization. We keep the nation's archive of printed and digital publications, adding around 3 million new items of our collection every year. And that is spread across this site in St Pancras and in Leeds. We have many books, of course, and we are a reference library. We're not a lending library, so unfortunately you can't take things away, but I'll speak a bit more about how you might access the collections in a minute. But we also have newspapers, sound recordings, patents, business patents, prints, drawings, papyri, maps and manuscripts. And I'm going to show you a short clip now and it's one of my, oh, hang on, there we go. It's one of my lovely colleagues, Julian Harrison, and he's going to talk you through a couple of some of the collections from our Treasures Gallery, which is our free permanent gallery, which you can go and visit anytime. So hopefully this works. If you can't hear it, let me know. Let's try that again.
In front of one of the most... So now I'm standing in front of one of the most famous books in the world. Here is the first folio of the plays of William Shakespeare. This...
Oh, sorry, it seems to be a bit glitchy.
So now I'm standing in front of one of the most famous books in the world. Here is the first folio of the plays of William Shakespeare. This book was published in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died, and it was the first time that all his plays were gathered together in one book. What we're really excited about in this display and across the Treasures Gallery is that we are showcasing far more works which are written by women. So, for example, in this display about women in Shakespeare, there's a real focus on plays which were performed by women, including actors such as Vivien Leigh. Next to me is the writing desk of the famous novelist Jane Austen. Now, this was presented to her by her father in 1794, and if you look at it very carefully, there's a little drawer where she could keep her pens and an ink pot, and placed on top of her writing desk is a letter that she herself wrote to her brother Frank, congratulating him on the birth of his son. This year is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Florence Nightingale, and on display in our Treasures Gallery we have our own diagram entitled Causes of Mortality in the Army in the East, which she herself drew in the Crimea in 1858. It's really important because...
Okay, so what I'm going to do in a little bit is I will copy and paste a link to this short video into the chat, so you can carry on watching it. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. But that just gives you a flavour of some of the collections that we have that are on display in our permanent Treasures Gallery that you can go in and have a look at for free. So let me just move the presentation forward. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit more about how you can use the library. And I'm going to caveat this by saying, of course, things have changed in the last year because of the pandemic, and a lot of the things I'm going to speak about have been moved online, and now things are starting to move back to normal. There are restrictions and guidelines in place to keep you safe at the library. And so you can now start to visit the library and go to some of the things I'm going to talk about. But for pretty much everything I talk about, there will be an online and something you can do in person, which is great to be able to have that opportunity. Okay, so some of the ways that you can use the library and engage with the library. Well, first of all, you can come visit an exhibition. We have our Treasures of the British Library exhibition, which is our permanent gallery, which is refreshed every 6 to 8 months with some new objects every now and then. Some new things go in there. That last video, I think, was from last year with the 200th anniversary of Florence Nightingale birth. But depending on what the big anniversaries are, if there's anything significant that we want to mark, and then we'll put something new in that gallery. So it is changing. If you want to come visit, twice or 3 times a year, you will see something new when you go in there. Our big exhibition, which was meant to open in April last year, but obviously plans were scuppered, reopened this year, and that's Unfinished Business, the Fight for Women's Rights. And the image you can see on the slide here on the right hand side is a picture from the exhibition. You can see the protest banners on display, and the display case here shows some amazing collections about parliamentary MPs and women who are involved in Parliament, who are sort of breaking the glass ceiling, some of the first women to take up roles in Parliament. It's an absolutely fantastic exhibition charting the historic fight for women's rights from the early 20th century right up to present day activists who are campaigning for things like period poverty, abortion rights, supporting refugee women. You'll see the ephemera in the exhibition. We've got those protest banners, there's diaries, there's film, there's audio, there's artwork, there's interviews. It's a really multi-sensory exhibition, and it explores themes about body autonomy, voice, identity, and self-confidence, and of course inclusivity, and reflecting on the fact that people from different ethnic backgrounds, or if someone's LGBT, they're disabled, they will experience sexism and misogyny in different ways. So it's a really, really brilliant exhibition. It's only open until the 1st of August, so you have got only a couple more weeks to go, but if you can go, I'd really encourage you to go. Our new exhibition in our smaller exhibition space is on Paddington Bear. This has just opened about a week ago now, and it tells the story of the much loved bear, Paddington, and it's a family friendly exhibition. So if you've got children or grandchildren or small children that you care for in any way, I've heard brilliant things from my colleagues and their families who have gone to see this exhibition, and that's on now until the end of October. And then a sneak peek for what's coming in the autumn. It's been announced in a press release that was sort of quietly announced a few months ago, so we haven't had the big hurrah about it yet, but from the end of October, our new blockbuster exhibition will be on Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots, and there are some really incredible collection items going into that exhibition, letters, correspondence between the two. If you want to see the Elizabeth I's famous signature with where she loops her name, then you can come and see Elizabeth I's real handwriting and Mary Queen of Scots handwriting in that exhibition. So it's going to be a really beautiful exhibition. So I would encourage you to come in and explore those. Okay. So as I said, we are of course a research library. So although you can come in and look at the exhibitions, you can also come in and do research. Now, it could be absolutely anything that you're looking to research. It could be your family history, might be a subject that you're particularly interested in. It might be the local area in Camden or wider elsewhere in London. But our reading rooms are open to everybody. You need to sign up as a reader, and that means you'll need to probably bring some ID and a proof of address to sign up for your reader's card, but it doesn't cost a penny. And then once you've got your reader's card, you can go in and use the reading rooms. This is a photograph of one of our reading rooms here. They are really great spaces to work in, hives of people hard at work discovering new things, and they're really places that make you want to really focus and get you know to whatever goal you have of doing your research. You'll get there in our reading rooms. If you don't want to go through the rigmarole of getting your reader's pass, but you just want to bring in your laptop and sit in a space and work, we have lots of wonderful seating in our public spaces. It does get a bit noisy sometimes, so I'd encourage bringing some headphones. But again, you will be sat on tables with people who are busy at work, and it's a really brilliant place to come and do your personal research or work in our public spaces. And then of course you can have a cuppa, and of course I have to stipulate you can't take your cup of tea into the reading rooms, otherwise my colleagues in the curatorial teams and the front of house teams and our reading rooms teams would get very upset at me. But I'm told that we have some of the best coffee in Camden. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know. But yes, you can come into the library, you can have a cup of tea, you can sit and chat. The library belongs to the public, so it's a public area, public space for you to come in and enjoy and make the most of. Even if you're just coming to meet a friend, we're happy for you to come and do that in the British Library. If you're looking for a bit more of an experience where you want to have fun, where you want to learn something or develop your skills, we have a whole public programme of activities. We have our cultural events programme, and these are things like talks and festivals and panel discussions and film screenings, and of course usually taking place at the library. Everything has been moved online, and actually you can watch all of our past events on the British Library Player, which I can circulate a link to later on. And brilliant speakers. A lot of the programs support the exhibition. So there's been a fantastic events program all around the women's rights exhibition. So if that's an subject area you're interested in, I would recommend going and have a look at the back catalogue, the archive of all of the events that have taken place over the past year relating to that exhibition. There's been some brilliant talks and panel discussions and things, including Dolly Parton, which was just superb, and that was recorded, so you can go back and watch Dolly Parton in conversation. Our learning activities, and of course I'm part of the learning team, so this is the area that I obviously want to champion the most to keep my colleagues happy. So I run the adult learning programme, and we run a series of courses on a whole host of subjects. The screenshot you can see is of our online courses that we run, so a whole variety of things from memoir writing to mindfulness and drawing, printing, which of course we do all of this online, and the top one there, the vagina courses, in partnership with the Vagina Museum, which is in Camden, which wasn't on Katharine's list of museums to go and visit, but there are some smaller fantastic museums in all hidden corners of London that you should definitely go and explore. So that one's in partnership with the Vagina Museum. And then our other learning activities, if you've got a family, there are regular family days. If you're a child or grandchild or friend with children, if they go to a school, teachers can bring in their school groups for facilitated visits, but also they can come and just explore the galleries by themselves. And then finally, we have our business and IP centre. So if you run a business, or you're thinking about setting up a business, maybe you've got a brilliant idea, or you've got your idea and you're on your way, but you want to know about patents, or you want to know about marketing or social media for business, then our Business and IP Centre run a fantastic programme of mostly free events actually, on how to set up your business, how to apply for your patent, how to set up your business website, how to sort out copyright and licensing, all those kinds of really tricky questions that you would go to Google and be bombarded with thousands of answers. The Business and IP Centre are there to help you with all your business needs, and they are, even if you're just interested in business and you're not setting up one, it's a mine of information. So they are a fantastic team running the Business and IP Centre. I should say IP stands for intellectual property, which you can go away and Google that. It's outside of my subject area, and that tells me that I need to go and do some more research in the Business and IP Centre to learn more about it. And just to say that exciting things are coming in the adult learning programme that I run. So a couple of pictures here at the top. This is in our learning centre, just gives you an example of some of the things that we do on site, whether it's making courses or discussion-based courses. And then the picture at the bottom gives you an example of what we've been doing over lockdown. So sending out embroidery kits to members of the public, and we've been coming together and creating embroideries inspired by the message from the Women's Rights exhibition. And as we go forward, I'm going to be working with the local authority, with Camden Council, and we're going to be developing a whole new programme of adult learning activities for our local community, both online and in person. So that's to come. So yeah, there we are, hugely quick whistle-stop tour of the British Library. And I just want to say thank you so much to Katharine and to Malcolm for having me here. If anyone has any questions about anything that you've seen in this very short presentation, do drop us an email. The email is adultlearning@bl.uk. That will come through to me and my colleagues in the adult learning team. But you can ask us anything about the library and we will pass you on to the right people if you have any questions about something to research, or an exhibition, or bringing in a school group, or coming in for a family event, or whatever it might be. Just drop us a message and we'd love to hear from you. So that's all from me for the moment. Hopefully see you at the library very soon. I look forward to going back and actually working in the library, as lovely as my living room is. But of course, you'll see I've got no bookshelves, no books, and I miss being around all of the wonderful collections. Perils of having a tiny flat. Can't put all my books out, unfortunately. But yes, thank you very much, Katharine. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. I can see in the chat that Pauline asked a question about the newspaper collection in Colindale. The site in Colindale closed down, it must be about 4 or 5 years ago now, but the newspaper collections are now at the main library in St Pancras, so you can still access them. And actually, I should say that pretty much all the newspaper collections have been digitised, so you can access them from the comfort of your own home. which is amazing. Or you can also access them from the library computers as well if you want to come in. But we have a dedicated newsroom, which is also a fantastic space to work from. If you are a journalist, or you know anybody that's a journalist, or you're just interested in current affairs, it's a really buzzy space. They've got lots of screens up with the news, rolling constantly. Again, one of those spaces that really makes you want to, motivate you to work. So yes, the newspaper archive is now at the main library in St Pancras. But I missed a site in Colindale. I did my master's degree looking at newspapers, and I spent many, many hours using the microfiche machines at Colindale, having a lovely time, but having to travel all the way along. I think it's the Northern Line to get to Colindale, and you have to sit on the tube for a very long time, but it was always worth it. Fantastic place to go. But yes, all at the main library in St Pancras now.
Right. So the first question we get is, can we opening times with COVID, because obviously everything's changed really. So how can we access, well, certainly the British Museum and the British Library through COVID? Do you want to go first, Katharine?
Yeah, that's an excellent question in the current situation. And all of the institutions that were featured in the talk today have websites. If you go on to, if you Google the name of an institution, big institutions usually buy a web name that has got their name in it. So if you Google British Museum, up will come the British Museum website. And the best thing is to go to the little link that says visit. On any website, go to where it says visit. And the websites of all big museums, they've been updated on a regular basis throughout the last 18 months. And they will show you the current process for getting on site. So at the British Museum, for example, the current process you meet when you go to visit is it will tell you opening times, it will tell you what the social distancing and mask wearing regulations are for the site, and then it gives you an opportunity to book a free timed ticket, which is how we're doing entry to the British Museum at the moment, so that we can regulate numbers on site and help to support visitor and staff safety. So website of the institution, visit is your best bet.
Cool. Is that similar for you as well at the British Library, Katie?
It is, yes, that's right. Yeah, so the visit tab on the website will have all the updated information. And of course, things are going to change in a few weeks, so do keep checking back. So if you plan to go, at the moment, you have to pre-book everything. I'm not 100% sure what the plan is going forward. And I don't know if some of the restrictions will stay in place at the library just to help manage numbers. But yes, before you leave your house, just make sure you check the website and keep up to date. There's also a phone number as well for our customer services line. So if you don't do too well looking online, then you can also give us a call.
Cool, excellent. We've all had to change our working practices over the last year or so. How is the British Museum, the British Library, how have you overcome that? Have you got more things online now, or what are you going forward? Do you want to go, Katharine, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Well, I'd say very similar to the British Library, our adult learning team have been running all their events online, and then they're recorded and they're available on the British Museum events YouTube channel. We're starting to look at whether we can run hybrid events where you run an event on site for people who want to come into the building, but also you film and stream it, because one of the things about our digital engagement is, of course, it means that anyone around the world can engage on a digital platform. But what we don't want to lose is that very visceral engagement you have from actually being in the museum building and sitting in front of the speaker or standing in front of the object. So yes, heavy reliance on digital platforms, but I think going forward, we'll be looking at how we reintroduce live programming on site and develop what most people are referring to as hybrid programming. Schools call it blended learning. Museums seem to be calling it hybrid programming.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Katie?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same for us. I mean, what we've really tried to do, I would say, is we've had to accept the fact that you just cannot replicate the experience of being in a cultural institution, or being in the British Library or the British Museum, or whatever, wherever it might be, and just trying to offer as good as alternative as possible through those digital platforms. So we had an exhibition on Hebrew manuscripts last year, beautiful exhibition, but unfortunately opened about 2 weeks before we went into lockdown. But luckily that exhibition had been digitized, so it had been turned into this beautiful 3D state-of-the-art digital version of this exhibition. And so we were able to use that as a really useful alternative to someone coming into the library. So every single piece of work that we do, that we used to do on site, we've had to think hard about how we translate this to doing it online. And it's been same with the program that I run. So we've reverted to running things on Zoom. The library has invested in all of its staff by giving us all laptops and these jazzy headsets, so we can run them as professionally as possible. And I would say one of the sort of silver linings of the move to the adaptation to running things digitally is that we have built up a whole new audience of people internationally, but also in the UK, people who can't necessarily get to London or come to the library for whatever reason, or maybe they're just feeling lazy that day and just want to tune in online. And the plan is, as Katharine said, is to continue running things online and continue with this digital offer, so that we don't just go back to our institutions and it all stops and all those audiences say, oh, well, that was nice for a year and now we don't get that anymore. But yes, we'll continue with, as Katharine said, this hybrid model where we are running things on site and online as well, so we can, you know, have this offer for as many people as possible. I think that's one thing that's really made us think again in cultural institutions. It's not just those people who come through the door, they are super important, but there are also people who can't come to our cultural institutions but have a right to access this material and have a right to engage with us in some way. So it's really, you know, been the kick up the butt we needed, really, to be honest, to put those things in place and think a bit more outside the box about how we reach people and how we engage people.
Thank you. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we'll call it today. Just one thing before we go, the YouTube channel is currently being updated, so we have 14 more workshops going on there. They should all be on there, but I know 14's a lot, isn't it? Yeah, apparently they'll be on there in August. So keep on looking back at the YouTube channel so you can see those 14 on there. I just want to say thank you very, very much for coming each week. We have such a loyal following of great people. You have made these talks so enjoyable for me. Katharine's made them so enjoyable for me. It was wonderful to meet Katie today. I just want to say thank you very much. I will hand over to Katie, then Katharine, and to say goodbye. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
And the final word's yours, Katharine.
Thank you very much for joining me on all these Mondays. It has been a lovely year of sharing information with you about the British Museum, and this week about other institutions in our cultural landscape. I wish you a lovely rest of the summer and look forward to seeing some of you again in the autumn. And thank you very much for joining me, much appreciated. And thank you very much to Camden for being the hosts of this lovely opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. See you all in the autumn. Bye-bye.